So, I'm really excited. I was really excited to be asked to present here today. Although, as much as you can be excited about presenting on exercise and complications, because usually I work in a few multidisciplinary clinics, and by the time someone gets to me with exercise, it's kind of like, oh, now I've got to go see the exercise physiologist. I've just been told about all the things I can't eat, and now you want me to do exercise as well. So I'm kind of used to being that person that no one really wants to see. But hopefully I'll give you some, some advice today and some good take-home messages. But okay, so to give you a bit of an overview, I'm going to start with the bad. So you've all heard of the good, the bad and the ugly. I'm kind of starting with the bad, and we're going to just recap on what the complications are. So once we, if you do have uncontrolled diabetes and high blood glucose levels, what that's going to mean. So we'll have a bit of a recap on just what the bad is. But then I'll talk about the good, and tell you how it could get better and how exercise is going to help. Yeah, exercise and good, who would have thought? But then there's the ugly. And generally the ugly is, okay, we know what to do. There's lots of information, as both Peter and Evangeline have spoken about, is, how much conflicting evidence there is and what should I do and how should I do it. And this is where things can get a bit messy, I think, because we've all got lives, we've all got responsibilities, there's things we need to do, there's all sorts of things pulling our attention, and we get to the end of the day and we still haven't done our exercise, and that's where things can get a bit messy and complicated. And so hopefully by the end of today you might have a bit of a better understanding and a bit more of an idea of how we can integrate some of these benefits into our life. But that's why it's ugly. Okay, so let's start with the bad news. So let's talk about the complications, and Peter and Evangeline have mentioned some of these, but I'm just going to go into them a little bit more in depth. So firstly, there's what we call microvascular complications, and that starts with eye damage, so retinopathy, where you can get blurred vision, and what that happens there, what Peter mentioned was that the damage to the blood vessels, which firstly affects the eye. Also, you can have nerve damage, peripheral nerve damage, but also autonomic nerve damage, which means that at any given resting, your heart rate actually increases. So we've got an increased resting heart rate, increased urinary frequency, and erectile dysfunction. So they're the nerve damage or part of things that can happen when we have uncontrolled blood glucose levels. And kidney damage, again mentioned earlier today. So these are the microvascular changes. And what can happen with kidney damage is it can have all these systems interact with each other. So once we've got kidney damage, that also contributes to eye damage, and it also contributes to nerve damage. So it's a pretty doom and gloom picture, isn't it? We're only up to microvascular. Yay, thanks for coming along. Macrovascular, and this is, probably the bigger issues that we've got as well is the heart damage that we can have, and one of those in particular that I want to talk more about is coronary artery disease, which is a huge complication and problem that we see, particularly in diabetics. Brain, also we have higher risk of transient ischemic attacks, stroke, and also cognitive impairment. And our extremities. So along with decreased sensation and nerve damage, there's also vascular changes which can cause gangrene and possible amputation. It's not a pretty picture. Again, this is uncontrolled. It's okay. These are the things that hopefully we're just painting that picture of, doing the right thing and making these wonderful lifestyle changes, and that there's things that you can control. So don't despair. I want to just take a bit of a closer look at atherosclerosis. So again, there's been a bit of talk about cholesterol this morning, and really that's the bad LDL cholesterol that deposits in the arteries and forms what we call plaque. And when we get a progressive build-up, which increases in size, and this restricts blood flow, and then what else can happen is that when that plaque ruptures, we get a blood clot, and that's what here's where we get some really serious complications that can cause stroke and obviously heart attacks and heart failure. Particularly nasty. I'm pointing it at the screen and wanting it to move. And atherosclerosis is one of the major reasons for cardiovascular disease. And you'll notice that was a bit of a theme this morning, even with Peter talking, Evangeline with the diet, and now myself. It's kind of like we're reiterating that here's the issues that we've got with poor blood glucose control and the issues that you guys are going to come up against with diabetes. As it's accelerated, the process is actually accelerated in inactive diabetics. So here's the first time I've kind of mentioned like what happens when we're not active, which can actually contribute to all of these complications that you can experience with diabetes anyway. So being inactive is contributing to that. Again, the story continues. Diabetics are 2 to 4 times more likely to develop cardiovascular disease, including heart attack and stroke, than those without diabetes. They're 6 times more likely to develop unstable fatty buildups in their blood vessels and have stiffening of the arteries. And pre-diabetics are also at risk of developing heart disease. We've focused on, I guess, the physiological issues here, but this statistic is sometimes missed, I think, particularly with managing chronic conditions, but 50% of people with diabetes are also thought to have a mental illness, such as depression and anxiety. And, contributed with the stress that we have of our modern lifestyle, our mental health and well-being is suffering as well. So this is another complication to having a chronic disease that's starting to be more and more talked about, and I think that was really an important. That's why it's got its own slide, because I think it's really important that we talk about this as well. Who's depressed? Now, if only there was an answer. If only there was a magic pill that we could take. If only there was something we could do that could combat all of these complications. If only there was a medicine. Oh, there it is. Exercise is medicine. It's actually a thing. It's actually what I do, and what I feel really fortunate to be involved in an industry where we get to prescribe medicine that is exercise. And I guess different to what Peter and Evangeline have presented. I'm not going to, sorry to disappoint you, but I'm not going to present all the studies. However, upon request, I can provide them. But we're really lucky with physical activity, and particularly with diabetes, as we've got really, really strong evidence to show the effects of physical activity on, not only improving blood glucose control, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but just on the impact that physical activity can have with improving your overall health and well-being. So, what are the cardiovascular benefits to exercise? It actually decreases the blood vessel narrowing, which Peter's spoken about. It decreases blood pressure, and as we've seen, the other guys have talked about how the importance of controlling our blood pressure is. It decreases our resting heart rate. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the heart as well. It increases our cholesterol profile. So it helps produce more HDL, which is our good garbage truck cholesterol, and decreases the bad cholesterol. So our overall profile is improved. It increases blood delivery to the heart, reduces blood clotting, and actually increases the flow of blood flow to areas of poor circulation. Because as you remember with some of the main complications, we've got a lot of issues with the periphery, and doing exercise can actually increase the blood flow to these areas to help with that as well. It also, importantly, improves insulin sensitivity, which is a huge benefit. It also increases the uptake of blood sugar in skeletal muscle. And a little bit of science, I've tried to keep it not sciencey, but it increases the effectiveness of a glucose transporter called GLUT4. That's insulin dependent, doesn't work so well with diabetes. And with exercise, it actually improves the function of this transporter to help regulate blood glucose. It restores endothelial function, and Peter talked a bit about this with his study when he was measuring the brachial artery. And I was like, oh, thanks for doing that, because that's going to help explain this benefit to exercise. But it, with the walls of the cells, it actually improves the function of those, the wall as well. And big one, when I showed the slide before around the atherosclerosis and the arterial stiffness. There's been so many studies that have shown the reduction in arterial stiffness with exercise. Who's ready to exercise? I've got a few hands, cool. So many benefits. I might be a little bit biased. Okay, but the unfortunate thing, it's not permanent. So the positive effect on blood glucose starts to lessen in about 48 hours and only lasts for up to 72 hours. So it's consistency that's the key. Wouldn't it be good, and I think I've seen those, speaking of social media, I've seen those posts where, you do one bout of exercise and you're on the scale going, oh, I didn't lose any weight, and I guess that's the key with any kind of what we call medicine in terms of exercise. It is that consistency and that ongoing dedication and commitment to your health and well-being and doing the right exercise in the right way that's going to produce the long-term results for you and keep these complications at bay. Here's where I get a little bit science nerdy, and I thought it'd be really cool to kind of put this slide up because it's one of my favourite things. And it's the importance of training your heart. And how it works is basically this equation is this is the amount, cardiac output is the amount of blood flow that's flowing through our body. And how that works is basically it's your heart rate times the stroke volume, or how many times your heart beats per minute is times how much blood is ejected in that heartbeat, and that's the amount of blood that's circulating in our body. Does that make sense? Okay, now in an untrained heart, and remember we said that one of the complications of diabetes is that your heart rate is increased at rest. So in an untrained heart, your heart beats really, really quickly. And because it's beating really quickly, it doesn't produce as much blood in each contraction. So what you've got is your heart sitting there, pumping really quickly, and just producing a little bit of blood out in that contraction. And that, it's working really hard. Would you agree that that's probably not the most efficient way for your heart to pump? Exercise actually trains your heart muscle as well. So just as skeletal muscle, your heart muscle actually, gets bigger and is able to pump more effectively. This decreases your heart rate and increases the amount of blood pumped per heartbeat, which means it's a more efficient and effective heart. And also remember that exercise also reduces the stiffness of the arteries. So if we've got a heart that's more efficient and effective and has the ability to pump more blood at once, and you've got less stiffness in your arteries, which is allowing blood to flow through, that's massive improvements in your cardiovascular system. And this is what, like Peter and Evangeline are saying, we've got nutrition that can help improve our cardiovascular system, and if we're watching our alcohol and our salt intake, can you see how all of these lifestyle choices is actually adding to your health and well-being, and which is why I think it's fantastic that Diabetes SA of putting on these events that can just show you how all these little changes put together make up a whole big picture of health. So hopefully that kind of makes sense, and that was a really important slide to take home. That way. Back to mental health. Remember that statistic that I put out there in terms of, 50% of diabetics can experience mental health. And I guess as a population as a whole, and we're really seeing a lot of strong evidence at the moment between the link between mental health and exercise. But it's still a new area, and it is a little bit complicated. It's probably one of those grey areas at the moment. But what we do know is that when we exercise, it releases good chemicals that make us feel good, but it also boosts our concentration and alertness, which is kind of why I got you guys to stand up when you did. Probably need another little break now as well. So it's really, really important for our mental health, and exercise is showing those results where we can improve, have these increases. So what do I mean by exercise? I think this is where we're starting to get into the ugly bit, where it's kind of like, well, what am I going to, you go to your doctor and they say, change your diet and also exercise more. Well, what does that mean? So the top row here shows our aerobic exercise, and that's walking, swimming, cycling, all of those big activities that we can do for a long period of time and recruits our aerobic system. You'll notice I haven't got any gym pictures, but along the bottom here is more what we call our resistance exercises. So they're lifting weights, going to the gym, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the gym. And I think that this is where people kind of go, oh, I don't want to weight train, I don't have time for the gym, only fit people go to the gym. It's just not my thing. But you can actually do a lot of resistant exercise with just using your body and minimal equipment. So they're the two types, aerobic and resistance, that we're talking about. There's also flexibility and other types of training, but in terms of the studies and the evidence for diabetes, it's really the aerobic and the resistance training exercises that we're focused on. Okay, how much? Aerobic, so if we start with aerobic exercise, 30 minutes a day. That's how much we should be doing, 30 minutes a day. And I saw a statistic, and new mathematicians might correct me, but I think 30 minutes a day is 2% of our time. 2%. It's really not a huge amount of time when we think about it, but trying to make that time of 30 minutes can sometimes be a challenge. How often? Most days of the week. Ideally every day, 30 minutes a day, 2% of your time. How hard? Now, this is where we can get a little bit of what's moderate, because what the recommendations are moderate intensity exercise. But what is moderate? When we're talking about aerobic exercise, it's when you go for a walk and you can hear your breathing. So you just get that bit of a puff up and you can hear your breathing. And you can talk, but it's a little bit hard where you've got those breaths in between when you're trying to talk. So that's what we talk about moderate exercise. So in terms of preventing diabetes complications and for overall good health, this is the recommendation. 30 minutes, most days of the week, moderate intensity. Resistance training. How much? So this is a bit of, I guess, gym speak, but it's 6 to 10 exercises, 10 to 12 reps, 2 to 4 sets. How often? Twice a week. So a minimum of twice a week, 2 to 4 times. But you get really good benefits from 2 times a week. And again, we want you to be in that moderate space. But because it's not aerobic and we can't do the talk test as such, it's kind of like, well, what does moderate mean? And if I was to ask you how hard, you'd say 6 out of 10 on the 0 to 10 scale. So 0 is sitting down like you are now, no effort at all. 10 being absolutely exhausted, you cannot pick something else up. So we want to just be a little bit over halfway, so it's a bit hard. I just wanted to show you the physical activity guidelines nationally, so what the government recommend, what our physical activity guidelines are. And basically they're saying, look, doing any physical activity is better than doing none. Duh. If you currently do no physical activity, start by doing some and gradually build up to the recommended amount. And I think that this is really good advice, because what can happen, and what I've seen over the time working with people, is everyone kind of, and sometimes this happens because you've gone to your doctor and they've said, look, you really need to start exercising. And so then you kind of make it a focus. And it's like, right, I'm going to be on my health kick, I'm going to start walking, you go out and buy some things, and it's kind of like you go all in. But that's not sustainable. We go from kind of couch potato to try and being an athlete, and it just doesn't work. So take the pressure off. That's probably a key message today, like take that pressure off. Have a think about where you're at right now, and then just do a little bit more, and a little bit more consistently. So the next one is be active on most, preferably all or every day of the week. You're better off being, increasing your activity by 10 minutes or 15 minutes per day, rather than trying to do something on the weekend. So we're sort of showing that the weekend warrior who, sits down 5 days a week and does rarely any activity at all, and then goes out on the weekend and does some sport and does lots of activity, it's really negating that benefit because we're sitting for so long. Do muscle strengthening activities on at least 2 days of the week. So you can see for the general population, it's very quite similar to what's recommended for those who have diabetes. They've also added in, again with what I was just talking about there, they've added in sedentary behaviour guidelines. I think it just shows what our lifestyle is like now with, TV and social media, driving everywhere. We just don't move enough. And they've actually had to put this into the guidelines to minimise the amount of time spent in prolonged sitting. Break up periods of long sitting as often as possible, which is kind of counterintuitive because we've made you come in here and sit all morning. We should do like walking seminars. Anyway, it's really, that I can't stress enough, just break up your day. Like even if you're sitting watching something, stand up, and there's sort of things that we can do to break up things in between that will help with that. So I guess the bottom line is it's about moving. It's about moving more. And this I like these pictures here, which is along the lines of Evangeline's pyramid that she showed about the Mediterranean diet. And I think that that's probably a key thing that ties it together, because if you looked at some of those studies, some of those amounts of the oils and the fats and things that you're consuming, you'll notice at the bottom of that pyramid, it had physical activity on there as well. So I think together with those diets, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, there was a lot more physical activity in those lifestyles. And if you look at the blue zones, if anyone's heard of blue zones, which is where there's the most longevity, there's a lot more activity involved in their lifestyles rather than what we've got in Western culture. And having fun. This is the main thing. Don't do something because it's good for you, or I should do it. I tell all my clients, we never ever say the word should. Like, should's a bad word, really. Like, it's really about what can I do? What could I do? What's going to be fun? Like, we use the C principle, which is like exercise has to be safe, it has to be effective, and it has to be enjoyable, because that's what's going to make you want to do it and have long-term sustainability. And I want to challenge your thinking on what exercise is, and potentially use the word movement and not exercise. So moving more, physical activity, and not so much about exercise. And have fun. I did have some quick considerations, which you probably may or may not know, about foot care and food and hydration and medication. It's probably a bit outside the talk that we've got today, but there are considerations when you are managing diabetes. And just some guidelines quickly around safety with exercise. If your blood glucose is lower than 5.5, then it's a good idea to have something to eat before you exercise. If it's higher than 13.9, then we need to consider ketones. But generally, if you're between 5.5 and 13.9, then you're good to go. But it's really about monitoring. I think that's the take-home message here quickly, is make sure you monitor, when you're starting exercise, make sure you monitor your blood glucose before exercise. If it's new and you're doing a lot of it, measure it during exercise just to see how your body responds to exercise, and then also after. And I think be mindful, but everyone's body responds differently. So sometimes, especially when you are getting fitter, you may need to see your doctor to reduce. It's a good thing you have to reduce your medications, but just be aware that it can drop below after exercise. They're just some signs and symptoms to be wary of. Again, be cautious, not scared, but just be mindful of chest pain, shortness of breath, weakness, sweating, confusion, dizziness and nausea. Hopefully none of those things happen during exercise. Sometimes thinking about exercise can bring on these symptoms. And see an AEP. So go and see an accredited exercise professional if you do need some guidance. And I think that was the key, is that the way that we work as accredited professionals is individualised program. Every single one of you here is different. You respond different. You've got a different life. And as I spoke before, it's really about integrating movement and management into your life. And generally, if you are suffering with diabetes or a chronic condition, it's not one thing. You might have some knee issues or shoulder, back, any sort of musculoskeletal issues. You might already have some other genetic risk factors and things. So that's what we're trained to do. Like we've studied and we know the science behind things, and we can really work with you with everything that you've got. We also do, myself included, have a special interest in behaviour change and lifestyle management, and I can help you really integrate it into your life. And that's what other accredited exercise professionals do as well. So any information, we also run a student clinic at the university that members of the public are welcome to, and I'll also take some questions as well.